If you are new to this channel, you are watching Unrivaled True Crime, where we go beyond the headlines and dig into the facts that most coverage leaves behind. If this kind of investigative storytelling matters to you, take a second right now to like this video and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it helps us keep bringing stories like this one to light. Now, back to Nolan Wells. Horn Island is not a hidden place. It is not a secluded, forgotten stretch of land that only a handful of locals know about. Every year, particularly on Memorial Day and the 4th of July, thousands of people make the boat trip out to its shores to celebrate on the water. Boats line up in rows along the northern face of the island. Families, friend groups, and strangers from across the Gulf Coast gather in numbers that, on a holiday weekend, can easily reach into the thousands. On the 4th of July 2026, Horn Island was exactly that kind of place. But that is not the image that circulated online after Nolan's body was recovered. What spread across social media in the days and weeks following his disappearance was a very different picture. The narrative that took hold was stark and accusatory. It claimed that Nolan had gone to the island with just a small group of friends, that he had been deliberately left behind, that his phone had been withheld from him so he could not call for help, and that the people who were with him that day were directly responsible for his death. Posts framing the situation in racial terms spread rapidly. The story, as told and retold across platforms, painted the picture of a young black man who had been abandoned on a remote island by his companions in the Deep South, and that his death was not an accident. That narrative reached a massive audience before any thorough, independent, on-the-ground investigation had been conducted by outside parties. Before anyone had traveled to the dock, before anyone had taken a boat out to Horn Island to understand its layout, its crowd patterns on a holiday, or the nature of its waters. And before anyone had sat down with the people who were actually there that day and listened carefully to what they had to say. Warren, identified as one of Nolan's close friends and a member of the group that was out on the water that day, stepped forward to provide a detailed, on-location account of what he says actually happened. His account was recorded at the dock where the boats launched, and on Horn Island itself, walking through the exact stretch of water where the events of that day unfolded. According to Warren, the group that traveled to Horn Island that day was not a small, isolated cluster of 4 or 5 people. There were more than 20 individuals spread across 3 separate boats. Warren says video footage taken at the launch dock on the day of the trip clearly shows a large number of people boarding multiple vessels, directly contradicting the 4-person narrative that went viral and defined the public's understanding of this case. He further states that some of the individuals publicly accused of involvement in Nolan's death were not even on the same boat as Nolan that day. This matters enormously. It matters because the accusation structure that formed online was built on a version of events that, if Warren's account and the referenced footage are accurate, was factually incorrect from the very beginning. A story told wrong at its foundation cannot lead to justice. It can only lead to more confusion and more harm. The phone situation became one of the most inflammatory elements of the viral narrative. The fact that Nolan did not have his phone with him was presented as inherently suspicious, as evidence that something had been deliberately done to cut him off from communication and leave him stranded without any way to reach the outside world. Warren addressed this claim directly, and his explanation is consistent with the boating culture of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, as well as the basic reality of what salt water does to electronics. When you are spending a holiday on the water at Horn Island, particularly in the way that celebration unfolds on the 4th of July, you are in the water. Waist deep, sometimes neck deep, salt water destroys phones. The water around Horn Island is frequently murky, particularly following periods of rain, which means visibility beneath the surface is poor. If your phone enters that water, the likelihood of recovering it intact is extremely low. According to Warren, phones were left on the boats universally that day. When he transferred from one vessel to another, due to the boat emergency that ultimately drove the group's departure, he found phones piled across the console, belonging to multiple people, some of which no one could immediately identify the owner of. People had simply set them down and returned to the water, as is common practice during that style of gathering. Nolan leaving his phone on the boat was not unusual. It reflected exactly what everyone around him was doing. That brings us to the boat emergency itself, because this is the moment where the story of July 4th, 2026 shifts from a holiday outing into something far more urgent and consequential. One of the 3 boats the group had taken out to Horn Island began taking on water. The bilge pump, the mechanical component designed to expel water that enters a boat's hull, had failed. When Warren opened the rear hatch of the vessel, water had risen to the level of the batteries. Water was also approaching the transom, the rear section of the hull where the motor is mounted. This was a genuine maritime emergency. The boat was at serious risk of sinking, and the group had to respond immediately without the luxury of time. In that moment, with the boat taking on water and decisions needing to be made fast, the friends urged Nolan to get on board and leave with them. According to Warren, they explicitly and repeatedly told him to get on the boat, pressing him directly to come with the group. Nolan chose not to. He was with a young woman he had been spending time with during the trip, and he made the decision, as an adult, to remain on the island rather than board the vessel. Warren emphasizes that a female witness to this specific exchange exists, and that her account corroborates the fact that Nolan was asked to leave, that he was not forced or coerced into staying, and that his remaining on the island was his own choice. By approximately 4:30 that afternoon, the group, including every individual who would later be publicly accused of involvement in Nolan's death, had departed Horn Island. The compromised boat was towed out due to its condition. They were gone from the island entirely. What occurred after 4:30 is where this case enters its most painful and unresolved territory. A report emerged indicating that Nolan was seen by a witness at approximately 6:30 that evening, roughly 2 full hours after the friend group's departure from the island. If that account is accurate, it places Nolan alive and present on or near Horn Island at a time when the people being accused of causing his death were no longer anywhere near the location. That 2-hour window between the group's departure and the last reported sighting of Nolan is a critical gap, and it is a gap that the viral narrative never meaningfully engaged with. What happened between 6:30 and the moment Nolan entered the water remains the central unresolved question of this case. The physical geography of Horn Island provides context that is both crucial and deeply sobering. The underwater terrain along the island's north side changes dramatically over very short distances. Water that is waist-deep transitions to neck-deep within a few strides, then drops to depths of 17 to 20 feet. Within a quarter mile of the island's shoreline, depths reach 30 feet. The western tip of the island is known among local boaters for powerful, unpredictable currents that can overwhelm even a strong swimmer. On the 4th of July, with thousands of people in and around the water throughout the day and well into the evening, the combination of alcohol consumption, rapidly changing depths, strong currents, and limited underwater visibility creates conditions that carry genuine and serious danger. As the afternoon gave way to evening and crowds began thinning, the environment around Horn Island would have become progressively less forgiving for anyone remaining on or near the water without companions nearby. Nolan's body was recovered, and his death was officially ruled a drowning. That is the finding on record. What the full sequence of events looked like during those final hours, who else may have been in his vicinity, and whether the female witness who observed him choose to stay on the island has provided investigators with a complete account, are questions that have not been fully resolved in the public record. The investigation into Nolan's death was handled by local Mississippi law enforcement authorities. As of the time this content was produced, no criminal charges have been publicly filed against any member of the friend group in connection with his death. The aftermath of this case extends well beyond the loss of one young man on a summer holiday. It exposed something deeply troubling about the speed at which a story moves across social media platforms and the ease with which essential context can be stripped away in the process. The friends who were present with Nolan that day have lived under sustained public suspicion, online harassment, and direct personal threats. Their lives were altered by a narrative that, according to the available on-the-ground evidence, the video footage Warren references, the geography of the island, and the witness accounts, diverged significantly from the documented facts. For Nolan's family, none of this resolves anything that truly matters to them. Their loved one went out onto the water on a summer holiday and did not return. Whatever the complete truth of that day ultimately reveals, a young man is gone, and the grief that his family carries forward is permanent and immeasurable. There is the version of this story that social media constructed and spread rapidly, and then there is the version that emerges when someone actually travels to the dock, boards a boat, stands in the water where the depth changes without warning from neck level to a 17-foot drop within a few paces, and looks down an 11-mile island trying to comprehend what a gathering of thousands of people actually looks like in that space. Those two versions of this story are not the same, and the distance between them is where the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells most likely lives. This case raises questions that reach far beyond any single tragedy. It asks what responsibility we carry when we share a story before the facts are established. It asks what damage is done when the loudest narrative is not the most accurate one. And it asks what justice genuinely requires, not the justice of a viral moment, but the kind built on evidence, on witnesses, on the physical reality of a place, and on the honest, difficult work of finding out what actually happened. What Nolan Wells deserves, above everything else, is the truth pursued without distortion and without agenda. That is what his life demands, and that is the standard this story should be held to. That is exactly the commitment we make here at Unrivaled True Crime. If you believe that accuracy matters, that victims deserve more than a viral narrative, and that the full story is always worth finding, then support this channel. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who has been following this case and deserves to hear the complete picture. We will keep going. We will keep asking the questions that others leave behind. And we will not stop until every angle of this story has been examined with the seriousness it deserves. Nolan Wells went out to celebrate on July 4th, 2026, and he never made it home. His story is still being written, and the truth, however long it takes to fully surface, is the only ending that does him justice.